The Thames spire sat like a jagged, obsidian needle piercing the perpetual shroud of Neo-London's charcoal sky. It was a marvel of vertical engineering, a brass and carbon fiber testament to a humanity that refused to die, even as the planet beneath them turned into a biological soup of its own making. High above the toxic mists of the sump, the air inside the spire was scrubbed, pressurized, and scented with a sterile hint of synthetic lavender, the kind of environment that should have made Inspector Eris Thorne feel safe. It did not. Eris adjusted his silk mesh, ensuring the fine silver filaments of his Valian nervous system were tucked securely away. Even here, behind 3 meters of reinforced polyglass, he could feel the planet. Earth hummed with a frequency of pure, unadulterated hostility. To the Galactic Union, Earth was a Category 9 biohazard zone, a death world, so aggressive that the local flora didn't just grow. It colonized, dissolved, and digested. Eris, a being evolved from the tranquil, low-gravity meadows of Valifor, felt like a feather floating over a furnace. Inspector Thorne? The tea is getting cold, and I'm told that's a hanging offense in this burrow. Eris turned, his external filaments twitching despite the mesh. Standing by a mahogany desk that looked centuries old was Arthur Penhaligon. The man was a walking contradiction. He wore a tweed waistcoat over a crisp white shirt, his sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms like knotted oak. A flat cap sat precariously on a head of salt and pepper hair, and he held a steaming ceramic mug with a nonchalance that Eris found deeply disturbing. "Mr. Penhaligon," Eris said. His voice modulated through his suit's external speakers to hide the tremor. "The reactor leak in the lower Thames sump is currently emitting Class 7 radiation and concentrated biopathogens. My sensors indicate the structural integrity of the primary containment field is at 42%. Why are you drinking?" Arthur took a slow, deliberate sip. "It's Earl Grey, Inspector. Tannin. Best thing for the nerves. And call me Arthur. Mr. Penhaligon was my father, and he died of a stubborn refusal to admit that a rain barrel shouldn't be used as a personal submarine." He gestured toward a heavy brass-bound chest. "Your gear is in there. Though if I'm honest, you look like you're dressed for a moon landing in a library." "I am wearing a Mark IV environmental exoskeleton," Eris replied stiffly. "It is designed to withstand the crushing depths of methane oceans. I assumed it would be adequate for a stroll in London." Arthur chuckled, a deep, resonant sound that seemed to vibrate in Eris's chest. "Adequate for the spire, maybe, but we're going down to the sump. The sump doesn't care about methane ocean ratings. The sump eats seals for breakfast and asks for a second helping of gaskets. Character count for this part: 2,784 total character count. 2,784. Eris stepped into the deployment bay, his exoskeleton hissing as the hydraulics engaged. Beside him, Arthur looked positively underdressed. Aside from heavy leather boots treated with some pungent, oily substance and a waxed canvas jacket, the human carried nothing but a sturdy ashwood walking stick and a battered thermos. "The atmospheric readings in the sump are impossible," Eris whispered, staring at his wrist display. "pH levels of 3.2 in the moisture, airborne spores with a 98% necrotizing rate, and the wind. Why is there wind inside a subterranean drainage system?" "Earth's got a bit of a temper, Inspector," Arthur said, checking his watch. "The sump breeze. When the tide of the Thames comes in, it pushes the old air out. When it goes out, it sucks the smog down. It's like a giant lung. Only the lung has pneumonia and a grudge." The floor of the deployment bay began to descend. It wasn't a smooth elevator ride. It was a violent mechanical drop that rattled Eris's lattice structure bones. As they sank below the cloud line, the pristine white of the spire disappeared, replaced by the suffocating neon-tinged darkness of Neo-London. The fog, a sentient biomechanical smog, clung to the sides of the elevator shaft like a living mold. "Warning," Eris's suit AI chimed. "External contaminants exceeding safety thresholds. Deploying internal oxygen reserves." Arthur, meanwhile, leaned against the vibrating wall and began to whistle a jaunty tune. He wasn't wearing a mask. He wasn't even squinting. "Mr. Arthur," Eris gasped. "The air. You're breathing it. Bit eavy on the lungs, I'll grant you," Arthur said, wiping a smudge of green soot from his sleeve. "Tastes like copper and regret." But if you grow up in the East End, your lungs learn to fight back or they just give up. Mine decided to join the local militia. The elevator hit the bottom with a bone-jarring thud. The doors creaked open, and a wall of heat hit Eris like a physical blow. This was the Lower Thames sump. It was a cathedral of rust. Massive Victorian pipes, reinforced with alien alloy, pulsed with a sickly green light. Below the metal walkways, a river of black sludge roared, throwing up spray that hissed as it touched Eris's suit. "We have 2 kilometers to the primary reactor," Eris said, his suit's HUD flickering as the interference from the fog began to scramble his electronics. "We must move with extreme caution. Any breach in my seals will result in total biological dissolution within 12 seconds. Arthur stepped out onto the slick, vibrating metal walkway. His boots made a heavy, unhurried thud. "Stay behind me, Inspector. And if you see a vine that looks like it's trying to solve a Rubik's Cube, don't touch it. That's a strangler willow, and it's got a very poor sense of humor." Character count for this part: 2,812 total character count. 5,596. They hadn't been walking for 10 minutes before the environment decided to test Eris's sanity. A gust of wind, laden with needle-like droplets of acid rain, tore through the corridor. Eris crouched, his suit's magnetic clamps locking him to the floor to prevent being swept into the sludge. "Pressure anomaly detected," Eris shouted over the roar of the wind. "Wind speed 180 kilometers per hour. We must seek shelter." Arthur didn't crouch. He merely tilted his flat cap lower and leaned into the gale. He looked like a man walking to the corner shop for a newspaper. When a piece of flying debris, a rusted shrapnel plate, whizzed toward his head, he didn't flinch. He caught it with one hand, glanced at it and tossed it into the abyss. "Getting a bit breezy, isn't it?" Arthur called back. He stopped, leaned over the railing of the walkway, and reached into the dark. Eris watched in horror as Arthur's bare hand plunged into a patch of glowing purple moss that was growing on the underside of a steam pipe. The suit's sensor screamed, "Biological hazard. Toxicity level extreme." "What are you doing?" Eris shrieked. "That moss is a grade 4 neurotoxin." Arthur pulled his hand back, holding a small squirming creature that looked like a cross between a beetle and a rusted bolt. "Found a sump grub. Good luck these. If they're hiding in the moss, it means the electrical storm is about 20 minutes away. We'd best pick up the pace." He popped the grub into his waistcoat pocket and kept walking. Eris stared at his own hand, encased in 3 inches of reinforced shielding. He felt a sudden sharp pang of inadequacy. To the Valian, the galaxy was a place of rules, of safety margins, of predictable outcomes. To the human, the galaxy was just a series of inconveniences to be managed with a walkstick and a pocketful of bugs. They reached a junction where the walkway had been dissolved by a leaking coolant pipe. A gap of 4 meters lay between them and the reactor access door. Below them, the black sludge churned with the shapes of sump gators, genetically mutated predators the size of small ground cars. "The bridge is gone," Eris said, his filaments twitching frantically. "I can calibrate my jump thrusters, but the energy signature will attract the fog. It will swarm us before we land." Arthur looked at the gap. He looked at the gator circling below. He looked at his tea thermos. "Tell you what, Inspector. I'll give you a backlift. You're mostly air and fancy tin anyway." "A backlift? You cannot be serious. The physical exertion in this humidity." "Hush now," Arthur said, grabbing Eris's armored shoulder. "Hold your breath. Not because of the air, but because I'm about to do something my doctor would find deeply objectionable." Character count for this part: 2,854 total character count. 8,450. Arthur didn't jump. He launched. With a grunt that sounded more like a tectonic shift than a human vocalization, he cleared the 4-meter gap with Eris clinging to his back like a metallic parasite. They landed on the far side with a crash that sent sparks flying from Eris's exoskeleton. Before Eris could even check his suit integrity, a shadow fell over them. The fog had arrived. It wasn't just gas. It was a dense, swirling mass of microscopic nanites and fungal spores that functioned with a hive mind. It hissed as it touched the walkway, the metal beginning to pit and smoke instantly. "Warning!" Eris's AI yelled. "Containment failing. Biocorrosion at critical levels." Eris felt the first sting of the Earth's atmosphere. A tiny pinhole leak in his shoulder joint allowed a microscopic amount of the sump's air to enter. His Valian nervous system went into immediate shock. Pain, sharp and cold, flared through his filaments. He slumped against the reactor door, his vision blurring. It's inside, Eris wheezed. I am dissolving. Arthur stood over him, his silhouette framed by the swirling green nightmare of the fog. He didn't look scared. He looked annoyed. Right, that's quite enough of that, Arthur muttered. He reached into his wax jacket and pulled out a small copper-wrapped device that looked like a Victorian pocket watch. He clicked a button, and a low-frequency hum emanated from it. The fog recoiled, sensing a predatory vibration it didn't like. Arthur knelt beside Eris. You're not dissolving, Inspector. You're just having a bit of a panic. Valiance. You lot are like fine china. Very pretty, but you crack if someone sneezes too loud. He reached out with his bare hand and pressed his thumb over the pinhole leak in Eris's suit. The acid rain was eating into Arthur's skin, the flesh turning an angry blistered red, but he didn't even wince. He just held it there. I am dying, Eris insisted, his filaments twitching in agony. You're fine, Arthur said, his voice as calm as a Sunday morning in the Cotswolds. I'm holding the seal. Now while I'm busy being your biological cork, be a good lad and use that fancy computer in your head to override the reactor lock. My thumb is starting to tingle, and that usually means the radiation is getting sporty. Eris looked at Arthur's hand. The skin was bubbling. He could see the raw red muscle beneath. And yet Arthur's pulse, visible in his wrist, was steady, rhythmic, calm. It was the Tuesday effect. To Eris, this was an existential apocalypse. To Arthur, it was a biological Tuesday. Character count for this part: 2,798 total character count. 11,248. Inspired by a sudden desperate surge of shame, Eris forced his trembling filaments to interface with the reactor's control panel. His mind flooded with the chaotic data of a core in mid-meltdown. The radiation levels were high enough to cook a Cerati in seconds. The magnetic containment was flickering like a dying candle. I cannot stabilize the magnetic bottle, Eris cried. The coupling is fused. It requires a physical bypass. Someone has to manually hold the shunt open while the system reboots. A physical bypass, eh? Arthur asked, his eyes narrowing as he looked through the reinforced porthole of the reactor chamber. Inside, the core glowed with a violent ultraviolet light. I'm guessing the someone in that sentence doesn't involve a robot? The radiation would fry any unshielded circuit, Eris explained, his voice cracking. And my exoskeleton is too bulky to fit into the maintenance crawl space. But a biological entity. They would be dead before they reached the shunt. The sheer covalt discharge. How long do I need to hold it? Arthur interrupted. Eris froze. You? Arthur, you would be absorbing enough electricity to power the spire for a week. Your heart would stop. Your cells would. I asked how long, Inspector. Don't make me ask a third time. It's rude. 60 seconds, Eris whispered. But it is impossible. No galactic species has the muscular density or the cellular resilience to. Right. 60 seconds. About the time it takes to boil a very fast egg. Arthur stood up, finally removing his thumb from Eris's suit. The inspector's AI quickly deployed an emergency resin to patch the hole. Arthur looked at his blistered hand, wiped it on his trousers, and adjusted his flat cap. Stay here, Eris. Keep the reboot sequence primed. When I give the word, you press the big red button. And try not to miss. I'd hate to do this twice. Arthur stepped toward the maintenance hatch. The air around the reactor was ionized, smelling of burnt metal and ozone. As he opened the hatch, a wave of blue heat rolled out. Arthur didn't flinch. He didn't put on a mask. He simply took a deep breath of the toxic radioactive air, gripped his walking stick, and crawled into the inferno. Eris watched the internal monitors. He saw the human's heat signature move through the crawl space. The radiation meters on the console spiked into the red, then into the purple, the lethal range. Arthur! Eris screamed through the comms. Get out! Your DNA is being shredded. Bit tingly. In here. Arthur's voice came back, strained but steady, like walking through a static carpet in wool socks. Character count for this part: 2,822 total character count. 14,070 on the monitor. Eris saw Arthur reach the shunt. It was a massive vibrating bar of superconducting alloy, currently arcing with wild, uncontrolled bolts of electricity. Arthur reached out. He didn't use a tool. He didn't use his jacket as insulation. He grabbed the shunt with both hands. The reactor log would later record a Class 10 interruption event. To Eris, it looked like a man being turned into a lightning rod. Arthur's entire body lit up, his skeleton visible through his skin as the discharge cycled through him. The roar of the electricity was deafening, a screaming mechanical howl that echoed through the sump. "Now!" Arthur roared, his voice cutting through the electrical storm like a thunderclap. Eris slammed his hand onto the reboot command. The system groaned. The magnetic bottle pulsed, expanded, and then snapped back into a perfect, stable sphere. The ultraviolet glow faded into a calm, steady blue. The alarm silenced. The reactor was stable. For 10 seconds there was no sound from the crawl space. "Arthur," Eris whispered, his filaments vibrating at a frequency of pure grief. "Arthur Penhaligon?" A low, wet cough came through the intercom. Is it done?" "Yes. Yes, it's stable." "Arthur, please stay still. I am calling for emergency medical." "Don't bother," the voice rasped. "Just help me out of this hole. I think I've blown a fuse in my knee." Eris scrambled to the hatch, his exoskeleton tearing the metal away to make room. He pulled Arthur out. The human was a mess. His clothes were singed, his skin was a mosaic of radiation burns and electrical scarring, and his hair was standing on end. His eyes, however, were clear. He looked at Eris, then at his scorched tea thermos, which had survived the ordeal, in his pocket. "Well," Arthur wheezed, leaning heavily on Eris's armored arm. "That was invigorating. I think I've lost the taste for Earl Grey, though. Might need something stronger. Like a pint." He wasn't wearing his exoskeleton. He wore a simple, lightweight environmental tunic, his filaments exposed and swaying gently in the draft of the open door. They felt alive. For the first time, the irritation of Earth's atmosphere felt like a conversation rather than an assault. Arthur sat across from him, his skin still patterned with the fading, silvery lines of electrical burns. He looked better. He looked, as he put it, right as rain. "You're late, Eris," Arthur said, sliding a glass of amber liquid toward the Valiant. "I've already finished my first," and the barman was starting to think I'd invented an imaginary alien friend. "I was filing my resignation," Eris said, picking up the glass and smelling it. It smelled like peat, fire, and something dangerously alcoholic. "The inspectorate doesn't want me anymore. They say my psychological profile has become dangerously Earth-aligned." Arthur laughed, the sound echoing off the brass fixtures of the bar. "Welcome to the club. What are you going to do now? There's always an opening for a lad who knows his way around a reactor and isn't afraid of a bit of fog." Eris took a sip of the drink. It burned his throat, set his nervous system on fire, and made his eyes water. It was painful. It was illogical. It was, as Arthur would say, lovely. "I think," Eris said, setting the glass down with a firm clack on the wooden table, "that I'd like to see the deep ocean fauna next. I read a report that says they're quite large." Arthur grinned, his eyes twinkling under the brim of his flat cap. "The krakens? Oh, they're a treat. A bit grabby, mind you, but they're pushovers if you bring a bit of bait. Tell you what, we'll go on Tuesday. It's usually quiet then." Eris looked out the door at the swirling green-black clouds of Neo-London. Somewhere in the distance, a predator drone was being chased away by a flock of mutated pigeons. "Tuesday," Eris repeated. "I look forward to it." High above, in the sterile, safe observation decks of the Galactic Union ships, the sensors continued to blink red, warning of a death world below. But down in the sawdust and the smog, two friends just laughed, and for the first time in a billion years Earth felt like home. Somewhere behind them, a sump grub in Arthur's pocket chirped. No one blinked. They were too busy living. Character count for this part: 2,756 total character count. 22,520 as the night deepened. The pub filled with a diverse crowd of sumpers, humans who spent their lives in the toxic trenches of the city. They were a rough, boisterous lot, covered in the grease of the spire's gears and the scars of 1,000 minor catastrophes. Eris watched them with fascination. He noticed a woman with a mechanical prosthetic arm using it to crush ice for her drink. He saw an old man whose skin had turned a faint shade of blue from long-term exposure to cobalt dust, yet he was winning a game of darts with pinpoint accuracy. "They're all like you," Eris remarked, leaning closer to Arthur to be heard over the rising din. "They don't just endure the environment, they integrate it. It's as if they've co-opted the very things meant to destroy them." Arthur nodded, leaning back in his chair. "That's the secret, Eris. If you fight Earth, she'll break you. She's got more momentum and a much longer memory. But if you walk with her, if you accept that life is a bit messy and the air is a bit sharp, she becomes your best ally. It's the same with people. You don't try to change the wind. You just adjust your sails." Eris felt a strange vibration in his filaments. It wasn't the warning of danger, but a resonance of understanding. The Union believes in control. We build domes, we calibrate atmospheres, we sanitize every interaction. We've become so focused on surviving that we've forgotten how to actually exist in the universe. "Safety is a cage, lad," Arthur said, tapping the side of his head. "A very comfortable gold-plated cage. But there's no growth in a vacuum. You need a bit of friction to get a fire going." A sudden commotion at the door interrupted them. A Galactic Union patrol, 3 Serati in shimmering high-tech environmental suits, marched into the pub. Their crystal bones were vibrating at a high discordant frequency, indicating extreme discomfort and hostility. "This establishment is in violation of Biosafety Protocol 902, the lead Serati announced, its voice echoing like breaking glass. "The atmospheric filters are failing, and the presence of unshielded biological agents is at a critical level. All non-human personnel are ordered to evacuate immediately for decontamination." The pub went silent. The Sumpers looked at the Serati with expressions ranging from boredom to mild annoyance. One man at the bar didn't even turn around. He just finished his beer and signaled for another. Eris felt the old instinct to obey, to retreat to the safety of the spire. But then he looked at Arthur, who was calmly lighting a small, hand-rolled cigarette. "Oi, Sparky," Arthur called out, his voice cutting through the Serati's crystalline echoes. "We're in the middle of a conversation here. And your Protocol 902 doesn't apply to private boroughs under the London Sovereignty Act. So, unless you're here to buy a round, I suggest you take your glow sticks and clear off." Character count for this part: 2,914 total character count. 25,434 The Serati frozen, its bone lattice glowing a sharp, angry red. It turned its gaze toward Eris, its sensors clearly identifying his Valiant signature. "Inspector Thorne? Why are you not in your exoskeleton? You are in direct contact with unfiltered Earth matter. Your neurological filaments are at risk of permanent degradation." Eris stood up. He felt the weight of the air, the heat of the room, and the eyes of the Sumpers on him. He felt small, but for the first time he didn't feel fragile. "My name is Eris," he said, his voice steady. "And my filaments are doing just fine. They're actually enjoying the music. As for the unfiltered matter, I believe it's called atmosphere. You should try it sometime. It's quite bracing." The Serati stepped back, its bones clicking in a confused rhythm. "This is illogical. You are a Valiant. You are biological China. You cannot." "He's not China anymore," Arthur chimed in, standing up beside Eris. "He's been tempered. Now be a good little chandelier and run back to your spire before the damp gets into your joints and gives you a squeak." A roar of laughter erupted from the Sumpers. The Serati, realizing they had lost the psychological high ground to a being they considered their inferior and an alien they considered broken, beat a hasty retreat. They practically tripped over each other to get back into the pressurized safety of their transport. As the door slammed shut, the pub returned to its chaotic normal. Arthur clapped Eris on the back, a gesture that would have bruised the Valiant a month ago, but now only felt like a solid greeting. "Not bad, Eris," Arthur grinned. "Not bad at all. You've got the spite down perfectly. That's the first step to becoming a true Deathworlder." "Is that what it is?" Eris asked, sitting back down, his heart racing. "Spite? Oh, absolutely," Arthur said, taking a puff of his cigarette. Humanity's greatest achievement isn't the spire or the FTL drive. It's our ability to look at a universe that wants us dead and say, I think I'll have a sandwich first. We live out of pure, unadulterated spite for the odds. Eris looked at his drink, then at the room full of people who shouldn't exist, living in a city that shouldn't be standing, on a planet that was trying to digest them. He picked up his glass and raised it. To spite then, Eris said. To spite, Arthur echoed, clinking his thermos against Eris's glass. Character count for this part, 2,688 total character count. 28,122. The weeks turned into months, and Eris Thorne, once a prestigious inspector for the Galactic Union, became a legend in the lower sump. He was the Thin Man, the alien who could fix a pressure valve with a pair of pliers and a bit of gum, and who didn't mind when the acid rain turned his skin a temporary shade of bruised purple. He and Arthur became a familiar sight in Neo-London. They took on the jobs no one else wanted, clearing Strangler Willow from the deep-level filtration units, retrieving lost data shards from the radioactive ruins of Old Westminster, and occasionally, just occasionally, making sure the fog didn't get too close to the orphanages in the sump's lower levels. One afternoon, as they sat on the edge of a rusted pier overlooking the black expanse of the Thames, Arthur looked at Eris and sighed. You know, Eris, I've been thinking. That reactor leak wasn't an accident. Eris turned. His filaments, now thick and resilient, resembling braided copper, twitched with interest. I know. I've been reviewing the logs. The containment field didn't fail. It was pulsed from the outside. Someone wanted the sump to drown. The Union? Arthur asked, tossing a pebble into the sludge. Not the whole Union, Eris replied. Just a faction. The purists. They believe Earth is a stain on the galactic map. They think if they can make the planet uninhabitable enough, even for humans, the problem will solve itself. Arthur stood up, stretching his back until it popped. Well, they've clearly never met a Londoner with a grudge. What do you say we pay a visit to the spire? I hear the purists are having a grand gala tonight in the Golden Deck. Eris stood beside him, his eyes reflecting the neon glow of the city. The Golden Deck is at 2.5 GS and has a specialized pure oxygen environment. It would be lethal to most humans without a suit. Arthur adjusted his flat cap and picked up his walking stick. Then it's a good thing I've been practicing my breathing exercises, isn't it? And you've still got your old ID badge, right? Eris smiled, a wide, confident, and utterly terrifying human smile. I do. And I think I know exactly what to say to them. What's that? Interesting, Eris said, his voice echoing with the ghost of a small human girl in a storm dome. Do it again. Character count for this part, 2,610 total character count. 30,732. The Golden Deck was an offensive display of luxury. Suspended at the very tip of the spire, it was a bubble of artificial perfection. The guests, high-ranking Dravik, Sarati, and Breath, moved with an ethereal grace, their crystalline and bioluminescent bodies shimmering under the soft golden light. The air was so pure it felt like drinking liquid silk, and the gravity was perfectly tuned to the galactic average. The gala was in full swing when the elevator chimed. The doors opened and the music died. Out stepped Eris Thorne. He wasn't in a suit. He was wearing a grease-stained mechanic's tunic, his copper-braided filaments swaying with a wild rhythmic energy. Beside him was a man in a flat cap and a waxed canvas jacket, carrying a battered thermos and smelling of damp wood and cheap tobacco. Inspector Thorne? A Dravik official gasped, its skin turning a sickly mottled gray. What? What is the meaning of this? And why have you brought this biological hazard into the Golden Deck? Eris walked into the center of the room, his boots leaving faint, oily smudges on the white marble floor. He looked around at the pristine faces, the sanitized lives, the terrified eyes. I'm not an inspector anymore, Eris said, his voice resonant and clear, devoid of any mechanical modulation. And this isn't a hazard. This is Arthur. He's a friend. And he's here to tell you that your little experiment in the sump failed. A tall Sarati, the leader of the Purist faction, stepped forward. Its bones were vibrating at a frequency so high it was almost a whistle. The sump is a cesspool. It should have been purged decades ago. We simply accelerated the inevitable. Humans are a mistake, Thorne. A biological anomaly that refuses to die. Mistake, Arthur said, stepping forward and unscrewing his thermos. The smell of Hightan and Earl Grey filled the room, clashing violently with the synthetic perfumes. That's a bit harsh, don't you think? We've been quite polite about you lot building a giant needle in our backyard. But when you start messing with the plumbing, well, that's when the mistake gets a bit grumpy. You shouldn't even be able to breathe here, the Sarati hissed. The oxygen concentration is 98%. Your lungs should be burning. Arthur took a long, slow sip of his tea. He let out a satisfied ah, then looked the Sarati right in its glowing optical sensors. It's a bit thin, to be honest, Arthur said. Like breathing through a straw. But I've had worse. Eris grabbed a plate and handed it to Arthur. So, Arthur, Tuesday's almost over. What's the plan for Wednesday? Arthur bit into a wedge of cheese and winked. Wednesday? I think it's about time I showed you how to play cricket. It's a bit like the reactor. Lots of standing around, a bit of sudden violence, and no one really understands the rules. Eris grinned. Sounds perfect.